Hi everybody, Colin Stevenson here, joined by my hero, my sensei, John Lenhart. Hi John.
Hi.
Today we are talking about the difference or the definitions between the heart and the conscience. Now, our lives, we believe, are ruled by our hearts, John. Sometimes it's conscience because it's something that we haven't done, and this is where guilt comes in, and it's the guilt that's pushing us towards maybe not our heart. Would you like to explain your definitions, please?
Right. So this is going to be a three-part series because there's a lot going on here, and really all we want to do here is just separate out the difference between the heart and the conscience. The heart has a mini brain. The heart actually thinks, and it has three ways to communicate back to the brain. It's really interesting. So what I like to do is I like to think of us like a car and driver analogy. Your uniqueness is the driver. Your conscious brain, the 10% of your brain, is the steering wheel, gas pedal, brake. It's what you control in the car. Your unconscious is the rest of the car. It's 90% of the car. It's where all the energy and everything happens. Now, in there are these other parts. There's very specific parts. So your heart is like an onboard GPS. Back in the day, we used to have these GPS, and what would happen is when you go to drive somewhere you've driven before, you could say, go home. It'd tell you how to get home. And the minute you took a different path, it would ask you, do you want to alter your route? You're off the track. Do you want to get back on track, or do you want to try a different route? Then you had to make a decision. Your heart does the same thing. So all your thoughts go into your heart. Your heart looks at what you're thinking and says if it's something different than what you've done. So your heart is looking to see if you want to do something and it's not the way you normally do it, your heart pushes back. That is not your conscience. So the pushback people feel before they do anything is not their conscience. It's their heart. Their heart is saying, hey, do you really want to do this? And now you, the uniqueness, have to choose between your head, brain, or your heart, what you want to do. If you choose to do something different, your heart will go, okay, recalculating. And now your heart thinks this is what you want to do.
That's amazing. Now, just as you're talking about the head having the brain and the heart having a brain, I'm into my energy healing and I'm into kind of different holistic practices. And we always speak to people and teach them about the magnetic field that goes around your heart and your head. And the heart magnetic field is actually bigger, which for me, that would mean that it's giving off more power than your conscious brain. And this is where people try, and this is where the pull comes from. They still allow their head to overrule their heart.
Right. So there's three, like I said, there's three ways the heart communicates back to the brain. So it's chemical, it's physical, it's electrical. There's a lot of ways the heart tries to get back at the brain. So I agree that there would be all this energy there. The other thing is when people have a heart transplant. So let's say someone has a heart transplant and they don't eat hot sauce. They get a heart from a person who used to eat hot sauce, and now they want to eat hot sauce.
Yeah.
Because what happens is the heart pushes back on them and says, hey, don't you normally eat hot sauce? It doesn't know it's a different brain. It's just pushing back because it's got a record. And these people will do that. So that's the heart has got all this information. It knows what you've done, and it'll push back. So the issue is if you are thinking one thing or saying one thing and doing another. So if you have these conflicted thoughts, if you have contradictions in your thought process or your actions or your intent, it weakens the heart.
Yep.
And then the heart has to have all these different things, plaque and all these different substances to try to cover the holes in the heart. And that makes the heart hard, and that's where heart attacks and these things come in, and that's a hard heart. People who actually have all these contradictions, their heart is crunchy. That's where the term hard-hearted is. It's a person who's got all these contradictions. They're not open, they're not open to correction, all these things we've been talking about with passive thinking and everything else. All of that stuff negatively affects your heart.
Yes, and this is why when we don't listen to our heart, we become under stress, because we put ourselves in the situations that are contradictory to the way that we feel or the way that we should be acting. And as you spoke about earlier about the uniqueness and about that's who we are and our why and our how, it's not what we do that allows us to feel balance. And when we speak to people and we ask them to do things with a pure heart, it means it's all coming from the heart, and this is why it remains soft, it remains full, and it remains them healthy and in a safe place.
So it lacks contradiction because people are contrastive or humble. So soft-hearted is humble. So the last thing I want to say about the heart before we move to conscience is that, and I want to show this, I've shown this to people, and it's really important. There's a diagnostic tip for whether you're having a heart attack or not. So what'll happen is if someone's starting to feel something, you can ask them, point to, I'm having a heart attack, let's say, or something, point to it, or you'll not point to it. Where is it? Show me where it is. If the person goes like this or like this, that most likely is not a heart attack. If the person goes like this or like this, you say, show me. If they go like this or this, making solid motions, they're having a heart attack. If it's this or this, most likely they're not. So I know a lot of people get stressed and they're like, you can ask somebody and you can know that, or you can ask yourself, how would I gesture? Or what does it feel like? Does it feel like this or this? There's a problem. If it feels like this or this, it's just stress.
That's mega. So that's almost like the unconscious brain signaling to somebody else based on how severe something is. That's absolutely, that's magic. That just blown my day. That's my, so good. Thank you. That is something that will help lots of people moving on, and it could even help paramedics. I don't believe they've probably been taught that either.
Well, I read it in a book about that. So, and it's a Malcolm Gladwell book talking about how they use that to diagnose people quickly. So hopefully it's spread around. But it is what you just said about the unconscious. Where we're going to go with the heart and the conscience is how all these unconscious things affect us in the next two series. So you're dead on with that. So next is the conscience. And the conscience is in the unconscious. And this is where people really, this is a very powerful point when you're trying to change someone's behavior.
Yeah.
So if we go back to the car and driver analogy, I see the conscience as being this onboard computer that sets the comfort settings of the car.
Yeah.
So what happens is the conscience will make your seat the right way, make the air temperature the right way, the radio the right level, everything's the right level. When your conscience is being bothered, it moves your seat the wrong way, it blasts the radio, it starts the windshield wipers going for no reason, it makes you really uncomfortable. So if you're trying to convince somebody to do something, you're trying to affect their conscience. If you think their conscience is in their conscious, then you're going to convince somebody by logically arguing with them. But when you realize the conscience is in the unconscious, then you realize the way to change behavior is unconscious confrontations and these other ways. And there's a lot of impact we'll talk about, but I like to see the unconscious as this, like a motor made up of like 120 parts. And the conscience is one of those parts that's really, really important. It's a part of the unconscious, but it's a very specific part and it's very specialized.
That's mega. So the way that you were talking there is, I'm imagining driving down a road of life. So this is my journey I am on, and I am going down, and if I'm at one with my unconscious and I'm flowing, which we talk about sitting at 80 or between 10 and 80, going back and forward between truth and flow, and I'm going down this road and my car's comfortable, life's good. But
right, everything's coming out of you fine.
Yeah. Now, if my seats were not comfortable, or if I couldn't see because my windshield wipers weren't, or they were going too fast, or they were distracting and things are off, it means that there's things off within my life, which is going to make my journey not as fun. It's going to make the journey a lot more tiring mentally.
Right. So what happens is the conscience kicks in after you take an action. So the heart is the last step before you take an action.
Yep.
Conscience is after you take an action. If I do something wrong to you, Colin, after I do something, I might want to do something wrong to you, and my heart will push back on me. And if I decide to do it anyway, after I do it, my conscience will start making me feel uncomfortable. And that's guilt.
Yep.
Is guilt a good thing or a bad thing? It's all how you respond to it.
Well,
I was supposed to help us adjust, so it makes us feel uncomfortable, and I should turn around and respond to you, you know, and fix that. But the conscience only kicks in after you've taken an action, and it takes an action in response to your action. Remember, the unconscious is reflective, so your conscience doesn't do anything of its own. It only does things in response.
Yeah. And just while you were talking there about the guilt being a good thing or a bad thing, I think it's both, because you can learn from your guilt in order not to do something again, which allows you to move forward more comfortable on your journey. Or if you choose not to learn and you choose to ignore the guilt, your unconscious brain is going to keep hammering you to the point where you're going to live an unhappy life. And this is why when I speak to people, and especially within relationships, you know, people go into these relationships where they're not suited and they're acting because they're both out of balance, and it causes a conflict. If they don't recognize the patterns, 40 flip gap, as you've spoken about, or they learn from mistakes and their guilt, conscience, any of these things, they're constantly going to go through these motions. And I believe personally that people living in this life don't like to learn. If I'm honest, it's like they say, oh, I love learning, I'm like a sponge, but they really don't, because not everyone's 100%. I mean, who is 100% happy? People in flow. And it doesn't mean they're happy with everything that's going on. It's they're happy with themselves in order to deal with whatever's going on, you know. But when I speak to people and they say, oh, I'm terrible and I'm so low at the moment, I am so down, I am so this, their conscience is kicking their butt because they haven't dealt with things from the past and they put themselves in the same situations again. They don't break the bad habits. Oh, we will talk about this going forward. There's so much.
So you led that off by saying guilt can be a good thing if you respond to it, which means you need to be humble.
Yes.
And that is why this definition of humble is so important. I'm a bad person, I'm horrible, is not humility. Humility is able to consider the opposite perspective.
Yep.
So we've seen why the previous episode about humility and humble was so important. Humility is going to help with your heart. Humility is going to help with your conscience. If your conscience makes you feel guilt, then you should respond to it. So the last thing I'll say is this. I was just in a classroom yesterday, and I love to teach this point. And I say to people, how do you decide who's bad? How do you decide who the bad people are? And the kids instantly went, their actions. And I go, okay, so do you do bad things? Do I do bad things? I do bad things. The 40 flip gap, I do bad things before I even realize it.
Yep.
If bad is according to your actions, then everyone's bad. And worse, with the students I'm dealing with, if they do one thing bad and they think they're bad, they might as well pull the pin. They might as well throw a chair. If I'm going to be bad, I might as well be as bad as possible. And what I illustrate to them is I try to explain to them that when my daughter went to elementary school, my oldest daughter, the first day she came back, she said, Dad, when you do something wrong, you get a 1. When you do 2 things wrong the same day, you get a 2 and a note comes home to your parents. When you do 3 things wrong in the same day, you have to go see the principal. When you do 4 things wrong in the same day, you have to go home. And I told my daughter, I don't care how many 1s you get. I don't want to ever hear about you getting a 2.
Yep.
And I'll ask the kid, how do you get a 2? You get a 2 by not reacting to a 1 well. When the teacher goes, you got a 1, they go, oh yeah, well, you're an idiot. Well, there's your 2. Well, the measure of bad is how you respond to your bad actions, how you respond to guilt, how you respond to being wrong. That's the measure of whether you're good or bad, and that's what your conscience is doing. And what we're going to learn in the next episode is how you can flip your conscience and how some people flip it. Some people can feel really good about being really evil because they've trained their conscience to flip around.
Yep, I like that. And just to finish off, I would just like to mention about there where you were talking about the, you know, they can do bad and they can learn going forwards. You know, when people they actually hurt themselves sometimes because rather than change, they change the habit or they listen to their conscience. What they do is they punish themselves for it. And this gives them that low self-esteem, which puts them on this level where they then actually want to hurt others to allow themselves to feel better. It's so difficult because I watch good people destroy themselves over one meaningless or one escapade, and then they destroy themselves after it, and then they just go and it's just a train wreck that they just leave behind. And everywhere they go, it's like they're going to war with everybody because of one thing. It's so difficult to watch.
You just set up you set up part 2 perfectly. And that's why I want people to understand your heart and your conscience are 2 different things. And if you understand what your conscience is and how to respond, you won't make that bad first step. And you're right. The minute they make that bad first step, we are going to talk next time about all the things that happen between you and your brain. And this is why it's so important for everybody to know how to think.
Yes, brilliant. I'm looking forward to part 2. This is going to be very important and very prevalent coming up through the difficult times ahead. This will be enough to allow people to pull themselves out of that and love people more. It's great. So thank you so much, John. I look forward to speaking to you soon.
Bye.
Take care.